All right, so we just had one of the most exciting 100-meter races of all time go down in the Olympics a couple of days ago. And if you're anything like me, you've never been more motivated to work on your ability to sprint. So today I thought I'd put together a little bit of a video in between my laps with the sled, where I talk about some of the fundamentals of sprinting and some of the tools you can use early on in your journey to run faster. Okay, so when it comes to sprinting or any form of high-speed running, there's two main phases that we need to consider. There's the early acceleration phase, where we're a lot more bent over, lower to the ground, focused on building that momentum. And then there's the upright phase, where we're focused on maintaining all that velocity that we built up in the acceleration phase, and we're a lot more upright. I personally feel like acceleration is a really good place to start off on working on these things, because you have to learn how to accelerate properly to even experience proper upright running. It's also a really great place to start because it tends to be a little bit easier on the body and a little bit more familiar for people who have a strength training background, because you're just spending so much more time on the ground. A lot of the thing that separates more intermediate sprinters from the elite sprinters is what happens in the air, not necessarily what's happening on the ground. Now I'm going to try to not speak in too many absolutes today. I'm just going to explain the difference between early acceleration and then upright running in relative terms. Because at least that's the way that I understand it, and I think it's the most sort of flexible approach, where we're not really learning any hard rules or dogma. We just know like how the goals of each phase of running change, and then how we want our body to sort of respond to that. And so the main difference is when we're starting out building momentum and working on acceleration is we're going to be spending a lot more time on the ground. Our stride frequency will be a lot slower because we haven't got any momentum yet, and our stride length will also be a little bit shorter. The other key difference between the upright phase of running and then the acceleration phase is the torso angle. So relatively speaking, in early acceleration, we're a lot more hingy and pointing our torso down towards the ground. Compare that to the upright phase, where we're a lot more focused on maintaining our momentum. We're going to be in a much more upright, almost like a squatty position. And so the key difference with our torso angle and how it helps us accomplish these two different goals in the early acceleration phase versus the upright running phase, if we think about pointing our torso forward, that's a lot better for generating that horizontal momentum and just overcoming that initial inertia. And then all of a sudden, as we get a lot more upright and as we get to the end of our acceleration phase, then we become a little bit more upright. And that allows us to produce a lot more vertical force, which gives us that sensation of floating and helps us maintain all that beautiful momentum. Let's learn about how we can produce a really powerful first couple of steps and spend most of our time on the ground. So one other stat that I think I heard this from Jack Edwards. Sorry if I'm misquoting you, Jack, but I heard good accelerators will spend about 80% of the time on the ground in the first couple of steps, compared with the later stages of upright running or max velocity running, where you're spending about 30% of the time on the ground, maybe even less. So this is also why people like using a sled, but if you don't have access to a sled, you can use a little bit of a moderate slope or a hill to achieve the same thing. And all it does is it just makes it a little bit easier to maintain that forward torso angle. So hill sprints, obviously terrible for high speed running and max velocity, but for acceleration, a little bit of weight or a little bit of an incline, it makes it easy to spend more time on the ground and familiarize ourselves with what good acceleration positions feel like. It also slows things down and buys you a little bit more time. If you're not used to moving fast, wait, it's almost like a regression for acceleration. It buys you more time. So going back to what I was saying earlier about better accelerators being able to maintain a little bit more aggressive of a torso angle, and obviously that corresponds with a really aggressive shin angle in that first few steps as well. But what we need to be careful of if we're not that fast or we're not that competent of a runner is starting out too low for our capabilities and then getting bolt upright. So what we actually want to achieve is a torso angle where we can just smoothly get upright over our first sort of, maybe 8 to 10 steps. Like what we're looking out for, you'll know that you're staying too low in your first 1 or 2 steps if on that 3rd or 4th step you go from really bent over to all of a sudden bolt upright. And that's really going to affect our ability to build momentum. So trying to find the most aggressive torso and shin angle where you can still have a smooth transition out of those first few steps. And one other thing I'll say as well, your gaze is pretty important as well. So make sure you're not looking too far ahead of you if you're trying to stay low. And we can sort of use our gaze to slowly get ourselves more upright. And Jack Edwards, or maybe this was Jack Darcy, was telling me, you want to imagine that you're a plane taking off. So let me just. Now I want to have a little bit of a discussion about front side versus backside mechanics, because I think that this leads to some really productive conversations for coaching people who have a strength training background, that they're not so coordinated when it comes to moving fast and what they need their body to do in the air. So the most simple way I can explain it is front side mechanics refers to everything that's happening in front of the body when we're running. And then the backside mechanics refer to everything that's happening behind our body with our limbs. Or another way you can sort of look at it is front side is really dictating what's happening in the air, and then the back side is sort of dictating how much time we're spending on the ground pushing. And the thing with people who are pretty highly trained in the weight room but aren't good at running fast is they have this bias where they want to put a lot of force into the ground, which is good for sprinting, but they take way too long to do it and they spend too much time with their limbs behind their body. And then so they achieve the goal of putting a lot of force into the ground, but then they don't get enough air time to cycle the leg and prepare and set up that good foot contact. So yeah, it's all well and good to put a lot of force into the ground, but we don't have that much time to do it. We want to put all that force into the ground. And again, even though we're putting force into the ground for longer, if we really let our legs go behind our body, we can hit the ground harder and we can hit the ground stiffer, the harder and the better that we learn to cycle that leg. And this is something that sort of splits the difference between slower and faster people from the beginner stages all the way up to the elite stages. It's not what's happening on the ground, it's what's happening in the air where athletes are getting more and more advanced. And this is sort of why there's only so much strength. Like, strength training is really good for high speed running, but it's not going to do the whole thing for you, because you need to be fast and you need to know what to do with your body in the air, but then also on the ground, but then also in the air. And this isn't to demonize backside mechanics. I think a lot of people probably got too obsessed with front side mechanics, but that's more of a thing for people who are already sprinting. If you've never really gotten into sprinting, you've never heard about front side versus backside mechanics, you'll probably be backside dominant. You're probably biasing, just pushing for too long. Practice just running with your limbs out in front of your body a little bit more. And one of the ways you can sort of practice this is just think about higher stride frequency. Rather than trying to take long strides to make your body move faster, try to increase the frequency without pushing for as long. So again, thinking about front side mechanics and trying to hit the ground with momentum, it's not as important in your first couple of steps, but it's still something we want to see a little bit of. So even though we don't have as much space to get our leg out in front of the body, we still want to achieve a position where we can strike backwards, getting a lot of that horizontal force. And then, like I said, as we start to get more upright, just going to keep doing the same thing, but by getting upright, it starts to make us float and work on maintaining momentum. But regardless of if we're building momentum or maintaining momentum, it's our ability to get the leg out in front of the body and then strike back that gives us so much momentum. Because again, what you'll see a lot of slow people is the ground hitting them. Whereas we want to hit the ground. Obviously this is momentum, but as I whip my leg through the air, I'm also removing slack from the system. It hits the ground like this big stiff lever, and I make the most out of that. But then yeah, one of those things that we're trying to balance in early acceleration, we are trying to clear the ground so we can push back horizontally, but we're also not trying to pick our legs up too far off the ground. We're trying to spend most of our time on the ground, just get the leg, get enough air time so that we can strike back beneath us. Hopefully I'm doing that in these replays. This is the thing for everyone who's given me sprinting advice in my DMs. We can all describe it. It's like doing it and getting your athletes to do it. I mean, it's just a matter of repetition at the end of the day. Yeah, it's crazy when you have a look at some of those great accelerators like Shane Thompson. He's so inclined forward in his first few steps, but still somehow, like if I'm that far forward, there's no way I can strike back beneath me. And I'll never be able to do it like Shane, but just getting close to that. Time to deload the sled a little bit and see if we can start moving a little bit faster and still looking good. And so while you can go pretty hard with your acceleration training at the start of your sprinting journey, to ease your way into upright running, you can do things like tempo running, which is basically where you're just making your sprinting shapes. How I look at it is you're running as slow as possible where you're still making sprinting shapes. So you can't really run at a jogging pace and practice your sprinting, but there's definitely a speed that's well below your max velocity or considerably below your max velocity where you're still making those sprinting shapes. So, and I call that tempo running. So exploring tempo running, things like locomotive plyometrics, you've seen me program a bunch of those in the GPP program, so sign up for a free trial of that if you want to check that out. But then also a lot of like marching drills and skipping drills. So A skips and B skips, they're things that get shit on by a lot of edgy track and field coaches these days. They say that they're useless if you're actually good at running. And maybe they are, but if you're dog shit and you have no idea what good running shapes look or feel like, marching drills and skips will give you a chance to sort of experience that before you start thrashing your body with max velocity running. So go get yourself a sled, find yourself a nice moderate hill to practice some acceleration, work on your plyometrics, work on your skipping and your marching drills to work on the upright phase, explore some tempo running, and after a couple of weeks of practicing that, you can try to put it all together. And then once you really get hooked, buy some timing gates so you can track your progress. God, it feels good taking weight off the sled. If you want to join a community of other people who are all sort of starting out on this journey, I can't recommend the GPP community more because, like I said, it's a whole bunch of other people who are figuring this stuff out together as well. And you can get more help from me. You just send me videos in the group chat and I'll give you feedback. So you don't have to feel like you're making a clown of yourself for nothing down at the local park or wherever you practice this stuff. Oh God, it feels good taking the weight off. That's the thing, I know running longer distances is also quite trendy right now. I feel like a lot of those people, it's really trendy, even I talk about this, just building your engine with zone 2. But also, get some high speed running in your life. So you can just fucking oos people in that last couple of 100 meters. I mean, so if you want people to remember you, work on your high speed running. It doesn't matter what your goals are. People will remember you at the track doing shorter runs, but then just dusting people on the back end, actually having a kick. So you've got to have an engine, but you also have to have some high speed running mechanics in the system if you want to be able to kick properly. Oh, I feel so fast without the sled. It's probably not actually that fast because I'm pretty tired. Okay, let's go. So bounding for the first 4 steps, and then we're going to start getting more upright. Okay, one more, then we've got to rest, otherwise we'll be fucked for the rest of the week.